Hello, book friends. Welcome back to my next chapter in the book we're reading, In the Hand of the Goddess. We're on chapter 3. Just wanted to come on here and say thank you to all of you that have subscribed to my channel. It really does mean a lot, and I love seeing your comments, no matter what they say. And I'm sorry I've been gone so long. I think I finally figured out why I'm struggling with consistency. I used to read all the time. Like, you could barely drag me away from a book, but I go through phases where sometimes all I want to do is read, and then sometimes I want to do nothing of the sort. So I think I've been kind of in one of those phases where I haven't felt like reading in a really long time. But I'm trying to fix that. I'm trying to get back into reading, because I love doing this for my YouTube channel. It brings me, so much happiness to read to you guys. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get started on the third chapter. You will hear music in the background. I'm hoping it's not too loud. I don't think it is. I'm trying to cut down on the amount of ambient noise in the background that you might hear. I am in my bedroom. There may be some echoing because I don't have my soundproofing up yet. I haven't ordered it. But once I order it, it'll be a lot better. Right now, it's a little bit echoey in my bedroom. So, but without further ado, let's get started. We are on chapter 3 of In the Hand of the Goddess. Chapter 3 is called The Prince's Squire. Late one night in August, the night before Jonathan's birthday, Alana made for the Dancing Dove, the inn that served as a meeting place for the court of the rogue. Reminding Faithful to behave himself, she settled the cat firmly on her shoulder and entered the inn. It took a moment for her to adjust to the smoke and the noise in the large common room. The thieves and their women were louder than usual. They greeted Alana and Faithful with yells of approval, inviting Squire and Cat to join them. Alana nodded to George, the rogue himself, who was sitting at his usual place beside the now empty hearth. "Thanks," she told the others, "but I'm here on an errand." "Are you ever here to drink?" Scholar wanted to know. "What a sober youngling, you and Johnny." None of the thieves knew George's friend, the rich young Johnny, was in truth Prince Jonathan. "You never have a drop." "'Tis unnatural," Lightfingers bellowed. He yanked a pretty flower seller, called Laughing Nell, onto his lap. "Alan, you won't even drink to celebrate the prince's birthday?" Alana grinned. "You're celebrating His Highness's birthday. It's not even midnight. Does he know you're so loyal, Fingers?" George stood, commanding everyone's attention. "Lightfingers just likes to drink, Alan." Fingers nodded and grinned. "And if he can't find an excuse, he drinks from sorrow. Come upstairs, lad." Alana followed the King of Thieves to his chambers, sinking into a chair with relief. "Goddess, I'm tired," she said with a yawn as Faithful let George scratch his ears. "Up before dawn today, again tomorrow. Maybe I should change my mind and become a stable boy or something." George poured them each a glass of wine, then threw open the shutters, letting the cool night breeze rush in. "Anyone who wishes to be a knight is mad, to my way of thinking. I hear you did well with your lessons with Duke Gareth today." Alana laughed as Faithful explored the room. "George, you amaze me. I wish the king's spies in Toussaint were as good as you are." "That can be arranged," the thief murmured. Alana sat bolt upright. "You mean you would?" "I think I could be making some inquiries, yes. But you had best be certain you find a way of concealing your sources." "Yes, that would be a problem," Alana nodded. "I'll think about that part of it. Then, and you Would you make your inquiries? She smiled at him shyly. It could be important. You know, with the situation with Toussaint. George unlocked the large chest in the corner of the room, lifting out a bulky package and a small one, and putting them on the table. Of course, he said. I wouldn't do it for the king, but for you and John I will. Aren't we friends? Here, lass, from Lord Tom in the City of the Gods. To yours truly. To you. The large package contained a silver chainmail shirt, decorated with tiny diamonds and sapphires, and a belt of woven silver wire, glowing with pleasure, for Alana had rarely seen such beautiful work. She opened her twin's letter. Dear sister, I trust this will serve adequately as Trebon's honorarium on the occasion of His Highness's birthday. Are you trying to break my treasury? Just don't forget to mention my name. I did as you asked and put some protective spells on the shirt and belt. In fact, I put the strongest on them I could find. The masters questioned us for days, trying to find out who used so much magic without permission. I knew you would want the best. Once again, questions about us are being asked in the city. I think at least one of the new servants hired here at the Mithrin cloisters is also being paid to keep an eye on me. So, I played twice as stupid, and I'm being very careful. Perhaps you'll say I worry too much, but I believe you did something to make your smiling friend nervous. Think about it. Give my regards to the dishonorable George, and of course formal regards from the Lord of Trebon to the royal family. You know how to handle that sort of thing. Tom. Alana read the letter to George before burning it in the candle flame. He's got delusions, she said flatly. Why would Duke Roger take special interest in us now? George swallowed his drink and poured another. Weren't you telling me that the Duke's been testing your magic a bit lately? And twice you've been followed into the city by palace men. Followed? Alana stared at the thief. George patted her shoulder. They never got as far as the marketplace. I always have you or the lads watched on your way here by my people, in case my Lord Provost decides there's oddness in your city visits. Alana frowned. Why follow me? I have Tom watched. And why has he been testing my magic? George shrugged broad shoulders. This is dated July, and you beat Dane of Melor in June. He started testing your magic after the Black City, and that was a year ago. You're being followed dates from June too. I'd say you worried him with your magic last year, and with your strength at arms when you beat with Dane. Alana sighed and shook her head. That doesn't make sense. George smiled thinly. Ah, but it does, and you well know it. Alana knew what she meant, and she didn't want him to even think about it. She changed the subject. Anyway, thanks. Listen, I'll keep my ears peeled around my Lord Provost. You've been more than a friend. I don't want anything to happen to you. George smiled at her. With friends like you and John, I doubt much ever will. Suddenly, his face was very thoughtful. How old are you, lass? Alana smiled at him. You ought to know. I just turned 15. He took one of her hands into his two large ones. We marry as young as 15 here in the city. Alana laughed. I'm not going to marry, George. You know that. Shouldn't you know what love's like before you begin renouncing it? George was watching her, the oddest look in his eyes. Alana's heart beat too fast. Her hand was still in his. He stood, pulling her to her feet, close to him. George, you've been celebrating too much. She tried to keep her voice light and relaxed. I never thought I'd hear you talk like this. Why not? His voice was as relaxed and careless as hers. If only he would let go of her hand. Because you know me better. I have other plans. You're not even curious. He refused to look away. She had never noticed before how much green was in his hazel eyes, or how long his lashes were. She had to pull her hand away, even if it was rude. No, she said flatly. This conversation was far too personal. I'm not curious at all. Faithful, who had been sleeping in the windowsill, yawned and stretched. Quite right, Alana told her cat. Nervously, she gathered up the package containing the shirt and belt. I've got to go, she announced. He gathered up his sword belt. I'll just go with you as far as the temple district. You're carrying valuables, and remember, even I don't trust my folk completely. Good swordsman you are, but you might be outnumbered. He grinned as he fastened the belt around his hard waist. Besides, one of your attackers may be a wrestler. Alana made a face at him, relieved that he was talking sensibly once more. Thanks. I love having my nose rubbed in my weakness. George tucked the second unopened package into his shirt front. You'd worry me if you didn't have some weaknesses, little one, he informed her. We'll take the back stairs. It was fun to walk through the lower city with him, talking about the upcoming celebrations while Faithful dashed off after real or imaginary prey. It was so late that no one was out to see them. Her hands were full with John's gift, and she knew anyone would think twice about attacking a man who moved with such muscular grace. Also, sometimes it was pleasant to just be with George, to relax and forget about being a noble, about the ordeal, about being a girl fighting to win a knight's shield. George just let her be who she was. She asked, realizing his last remark had been a question. I said, are things with the Toussaint nobles so serious? The rogues in Toussaint think it's all just a court storm. But they admit they don't know their nobles as well as we. George's teeth flashed in a grin. Serious enough, I think, she admitted. Anything you learn will help. Then, I'll do my best. They reached the edge of the temple district. George could leave her there safely. The district was patrolled by warriors of different faiths, and the rest of the palace way was in full view of the royal guard. The thief pulled her into the shade of a large tree, where they couldn't be seen by anyone passing by, and drew the small package out of his shirt front. This is from me to John. Be sure you give it to him in private. You don't want folk asking questions about the giver. Alana tucked the gift into the large bundle, juggling it with difficulty. She looked up at her friend accusingly. George, did you... He laughed merrily. You mistrusting child. No, I did not steal it. I had it made special for John. It's quite pretty, even if I did have to pay for it myself. He looked around, checked to see if anyone was coming, then suddenly tilted her face up with one hand. Alana, he whispered, I'm taking advantage of you now, because I may never catch you with your hands full again. He kissed her softly and carefully. Alana trembled, too shocked to do anything but let it happen. There, George released her. Think over what I said about love. Pigs might fly, she snapped, her voice shaking. I should have stabbed you. He chuckled infuriatingly. No, I won't let you stab me and ruin our friendship. Will you be afraid to face me again after this? Alana felt herself turning beet red. This was too much. I'm afraid of no one, George Cooper, she yelled, especially not you. Until next time, then. He saluted her and headed back down to the city, whistling. Faithful rubbed against Alana's ankles, purring. Where were you when I needed you? She asked him bitterly. As a chaperone, you aren't much." "I am not a chaperone," the cat replied. "Besides, I didn't want to interrupt. You seem to be enjoying yourself." There was no way of replying to such obvious silliness. Alana turned and walked quickly, very quickly, back to the palace. Although Alana later remembered very little of the daylight celebrations in honor of Jonathan's 19th birthday, she remembered the ball that night vividly. That was when she met Delia of Eldorn for the first time. She had been sitting in a window seat, bored and miserable, when Gary found her. She hated parties, and normally the only way she attended one was when she was pouring drinks and serving food as a squire. Tonight, however, servants waited on the guests, and as Jonathan's squire, she had been practically ordered to attend. She considered it a useless exercise. She couldn't converse with strangers easily, and she certainly didn't flirt with the ladies as her friends did. She was busy calculating an escape when Gary, magnificent in brown velvet, discovered her hiding place. "I know you hate social events, but you'll never get used to them this way." "I don't have to get used to them," Alana retorted. "If I get my shield, I'm riding off on adventures." "Nonsense!" her friend grinned. "Come out of your shell. There are plenty of noble women who'd like to meet the prince's squire, especially since June." "I'm only 15. Alana replied automatically. "I'm too young for girls." Gary smoothed his new mustache. "You're never too young for girls. Come on, I'll introduce you to the newest arrival. She just came yesterday, and Mithras." He whistled his approval, added smugly, "I got to meet her first." He clamped a hand around Alana's arm and levered her out of her seat, walking her onto the floor. It was either walk or be dragged. Alana sometimes wondered if Gary knew his own strength. She saw the trouble spot immediately. Jonathan stood at the center of a cluster of knights. He was talking to someone hidden from Alana's view. The young men moved out of Gary's way, spotting Alana and grinning. Squire Allen's reluctance to meet young ladies was palace legend. Jonathan saw them and smiled, beckoning them forward. "Gary, you found him! Allen, come here!" A royal command was a royal command. Alana moved up to stand beside the prince, but she wasn't happy about it. Seated at the center of the cluster of men was a lovely girl with chestnut-colored hair. Alana lifted an eyebrow. Most maidens at court wore pale colors or whites, but this one was wearing a low-cut green silk dress. Well, the color did emphasize her bright green eyes, as a lighter color would not. Jonathan was bowing to the vision. "Lady Delia of Eldorn, I'd like you to meet my personal squire, Allen of Trebond." Alana bowed and found herself presented with a dainty white hand. Blushing slightly, she brushed it with her lips. Never was she more aware of her real sex than at moments like these. She looked up into Delia's face, noting the pert little nose and full red lips. She's a beauty, all right, Alana realized, and she knows it. "Allen of Trebond," Delia murmured, her voice light and throaty. "I've heard of you, haven't I?" She tapped her rosy mouth with her fan, delicate dark brow carefully arched. Then she laughed merrily. "The Squire's Squire! And you beat that dreadful knight from Toussaint. I think that's thrilling." Alana bowed politely. "It was nothing, Lady Delia," she murmured. "Oh, but you're being modest. I'm sure no Totalian thinks that it was nothing. Do you, gentlemen?" Delia asked the bristlingly jealous knights around her. Alana knew very well that at that moment her friends were wishing they had beaten Dane and that she was far, far away. In that Alana was one with them. She didn't like Delia, and she wanted to leave. "Do you dance, Alan of Trebon?" Delia asked now. Jonathan, grinning wickedly, replied, "Of course he knows how to dance. He learned the steps as a page, as did we all." Alana promptly resolved to put something soft and squishy in her friend's bed, very soon. "And he was always stepping on someone's feet," Rawl muttered. Delia placed her hand on Alana's arm, rising gracefully from her chair. "I'm sure he dances beautifully now." She laughed. The code of chivalry was very specific about moments like this. Red as a beet, Alana led Delia out onto the dance floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. She had never felt so ridiculous in her life. Delia was even taller than she was. Carefully, Alana wheeled Delia around the floor as the girl chattered about how kind everyone was, particularly Prince Jonathan. She knew now she didn't like Delia at all, and felt very odd whenever Delia complimented Jonathan. Finally it was over, and she returned the young noblewoman to her admirers. Good manners or no, she was going. Even the Chamber of Ordeal had to be better than dancing with a green-eyed flirt. She bumped into Miles on her way out. Her friend was worse for wear, to put it mildly. He toasted her with his glass of brandy. "Not sociable, Alan?" Miles asked. "You'd better learn to be a nice social animal." "I'd sooner kiss a—" "Don't, please. Sometimes you're too frank for an old man." Alana looked him over. "Need help getting back to your rooms?" she asked. "No. I'm staying to watch the pretty little Eldorn girl try to hook every eligible man at court." Alana clenched her jaw. If she doesn't succeed, it won't be because she didn't try. Miles lifted both eyebrows. "Jealous about Jonathan?" "Why should I be jealous about Jonathan?" she snapped. Miles shrugged. Some women like to break up men's friendships, and if I were you, I'd keep that in mind. "I'll stop by in the morning with my hangover remedy. It sounds as if you'll need it." Sometimes the odd things Miles told her made too much sense for her peace of mind. You're a good human being, Alan. Too good to be caught up in court games. Run along to bed." Alana obeyed, thinking, by court games, Miles meant the tricks people use to win favor with important nobles, to get revenge on each other, or to acquire power. Was that the kind of game Delia played? Whatever it was, it left a sour taste in Alana's mouth. It was a hard winter for Alana, and she sometimes wondered if she spent all of it in a bad temper. The cold was worse than she could ever remember, biting into her bones at every turn. Too often she awoke shivering in the night, despite plenty of hot bricks, and a well-banked fire. Once or twice she caught herself wondering what would happen if she climbed in with Jonathan. When the cold got that bad, she used her gift to warm her. The effort left her tired and cross in the morning, but to Alana, anything was better than feeling cold and thinking such thoughts. On days when she worked in the outdoor practice courts, she remembered the heat of the great southern desert with longing. The temperatures meant trouble at home as well. Coram wrote her that early frosts had hurt the harvest, and Alana found herself busy arranging for food and warm clothing to be sent to Trebon. Coram was doing his best, but he had not had a great deal of time to bring the fief back from Lord Alan's neglect. More than once, Alana went to Miles and Duke Gareth for advice. For someone who's never going to run a fief, she often thought wryly, "I'm certainly getting plenty of practice." That winter, as a preliminary test to prepare the squires for the ordeal, They were required to spend a January night out in the open in the royal forest. Fighting back an unreasoning feeling of terror, she would not freeze to death if she took care. Alana readied the things she would need. Out on her own, she burrowed deep into a snowbank and made a snug little cave for her tent and her fur-lined bedroll. A tree behind would keep off the worst of the drifts if more snow should fall. Faithful chose to keep her company, and he seemed much warmer than she felt, even though she wore fleece-lined leather over several layers of wool and silk clothing. She had planned to go ice fishing for her dinner, just to show Duke Gareth she could survive in the cold. But late in the afternoon, a sudden blizzard rolled in, dousing the woods in snow. Alana and Faithful secured themselves in their burrow, and from time to time, Alana thrust lightning through the air to keep them from suffocating. For the rest of the night, she and the cat slept and talked. She knew it sounded like meowing to other people, but to her, Faithful talk as understandably as any human. They had both fallen asleep toward dawn when the blizzard's howling winds finally stopped. Alana was dreaming of the desert and of a warm nap in the sun when she came wide awake. Something, grunting and determined, was digging in the snow overhead. Faithful's violet eyes glowed in the darkness beside her. "I think it's a boar," Alana hissed as soundlessly as she could. "It figures." Carefully, moving as little as possible, she worked lightning up and free, when an ugly cloven hoof burst through the beaten snow over the tent opening. Alana thrust upward with all her strength. She burst from the snow, shaking clumps from her face to feel her sword wrenched from her hand. The boar was squealing with rage, trying to dislodge the blade that had been driven through his chest and back. Suddenly, he stiffened and fell. Alana walked towards him carefully, seeing a glaze coming over his eyes. Gripping her sword hilt to pull it free, she stopped. The boar's eyes were a demonic red. Suddenly, he shuddered one last time and vanished. Wordlessly, Alana gathered up her things. She didn't need Faithful to tell her, as he was forcefully, that someone had just tried to kill her. Someone with a command of sorcery. "I have no proof," she snapped, and that was the end of it. She would never tell anyone until she had proof. On top of everything else, there was Delia. More than once that winter, Alana thought that if she heard that lovely girl's name once more, she would scream. Jonathan spent his free time writing bad poetry to Delia and insisting that Alana listen to him read it. Gary and Rawl fought a duel over one of her writing gloves, and Duke Gareth sent them both on border patrols to cool off. The only good thing about this punishment was that they had to take Douglas and Satchel with them. Even those two had been bitten by romance. Alana continued to dislike the girl unreasonably, staying away from her as much as she could. She sometimes felt that Delia knew Alana detested her. She also thought Delia liked to have Jonathan Squire giving her special service, fanning Delia when she was hot, bringing her glasses of lemonade, even dancing with her, all activities that got Alana into trouble with her lovesick friends. Jonathan went as far as to accuse her of using Delia to make her masquerade as a boy seem more believable. He later apologized, but it was their first big fight, and Alana couldn't quite forgive Delia for being the cause. Alana was forced to listen when John ranted about Delia's flirtations with other knights, and she suffered through his attempts at poetry. She tried to be the best friend to him she could, because it was obvious, to her, if not to Jonathan, that Delia was toying with him. The girl would convince Jonathan one day that she was his alone and ignore him the next. Soon they were sleeping together. Sometimes. Which only made it worse. John was cross and elated by turns. Only Alex and his squire Joffrey of Marin seemed unaffected by Delia. It was a welcome change to talk with them. It was during one such conversation with Alex on a windy day in March that Alanna discovered they wanted to test each other. Before he had passed the ordeal, Alex had been the best of the squires. Now he was getting a reputation as one of the finest knights in Tortle. He and Alanna had been talking about what it was like to be good, with everyone watching for mistakes, until it was only natural to find one of the indoor fencing courts and see which one of them was better. They had agreed a referee was not necessary, since they were only using blunt practice swords. Not even Faithful was there. Alanna watched Alex stretch as she did so herself, excitement running through her veins. She had always wondered if she was as good as her dark friend. Now she would find out. Their stretching finished, they saluted each other with the practice swords. Without warning, Alex struck, his hand flashing in a complex overhand pass that brought his blade within inches of Alanna's unguarded face. Only a quick backward leap saved her. She circled, watching Alex's chest. With all but the best fighters, muscle movements in the chest often betrayed the direction of the next attack. Except Alex was one of the best. Like Duke Gareth, who fought without signals, Alex moved without warning. He swept his sword up and under. The blow would have ripped Alanna open from abdomen to chest if they had been using real swords. She lunged back once more, but not quickly enough. The tip of Alex's sword sliced up her thigh, tearing her hose and gouging a deep scratch in her leg. "Hey, Alex!" she protested. "Be careful!" The knight did not answer. His dark face was emotionless, his eyes unreadable. Alanna faded back, then lunged to the side and the front, coming at him in a straight-like forward strike. Alex met her, their sword hilts locked. Body to body, Duke Gareth called it, and it rarely happened. For someone as small as Alanna, it meant real trouble. Alex strained, forcing his weight down, trying to make her fall to her knees. Alanna broke away and came back instantly, knocking his blade aside. The flat of her sword struck Alex hard on the cheekbone, and she stepped back, feeling ashamed. It was disgraceful to let her temper get away with her as she just had. "Alex, I'm sorry," she said ruefully, looking at the welt spreading across his dark skin. "Do you—" Alex brought up his sword again, smiling lightly. His dark eyes glittered with something she couldn't name. He whispered, "Guard." Alanna was suddenly tired of this game. Determined to end the match one way or another, she lunged in. Alex locked with her again and knocked her to the floor. Alanna rolled. Alex's sword point struck the floor an inch away from her head, taking a chip out of the hard wood. She glimpsed his face, and what she saw frightened her. His eyes were bright. The smile on his lips was suddenly nasty. She jumped up as he came at her again, but she wasn't quick enough. The flat of his blade smacked her in the ribs, making her gasp for air. She swung at his side and connected hard, making him wince with pain. This time, she put her sword down. "I want to stop," she told him. "Something's wrong." She got her sword up just in time as he struck. Their blades met and sparks flew. Alanna disengaged and got away. Sweat trickled into her eyes, and she shook her head to clear them. This was insane. He acted as if he really wanted to kill her. With a dull practice sword, death would be very painful. Alex closed in, unstoppable. He brought his sword up and over his head, coming down hard. Alanna dodged aside just in time. The blunt edge struck her collarbone rather than her skull. Bone cracked in her shoulder as she fell to her knees with a cry of pain. Helplessly she watched She watched the sword swing up and down, unable to stop its slicing towards her throat. She closed her eyes. If he hit her neck, he would break it, and there was nothing she could do. Very interesting, Alex. Miraculously, Alex dropped his blade and turned. Miles stood just inside the door, faithful at his feet. You've certainly proved you're better than Alan. Of course you are 4 years older, and you have several battles to your credit. The older knight's words whipped through the air like a lash. However, I think you two have played best warrior long enough. Or didn't you realize you had injured Alan? Alex turned to Alana. The nasty smile was replaced with concern. Alan, I didn't... He'll let me help you. Don't touch me. Alana cried as he reached for her. She quickly added, Please, Alex, it's my collarbone. I think it's broken. Alex knelt beside her, his face tense. Alan, I'll never forgive myself. She smiled tightly, beginning to feel sick. It's all right. We just got a little carried away. With my gift, I'll be fine in a couple of days. Alex looked at Miles. So, Miles, I didn't... The provost is looking for you. Miles replied, his sharp eyes never leaving Alex's face. I believe he has a border patrol ready. It must have been hard on you, cooped up this winter while everyone else got duties. Alex stood. If there's anything I can do... Alana nodded, sweat standing out on her forehead. I'll let you know right away. Alex hurried out and Miles crossed to Alana. Just lie still, he told her. I'll get a healer and some servants. We'll have to carry you out, I'm afraid. What brought you here? Alana whispered. No one knew. Miles nodded to the cat, bumping Alana's good hand. Faithful brought me. He's very forceful. I'm glad I listened. Alex was trying to kill you. Alana shook her head, the effort bringing on a wave of nausea. He's been my friend for years. He didn't look so friendly when we walked in, Faithful told her. Alana grimaced. I don't want to hear any more about it. But in her mind, a voice was saying, he hasn't been a close friend in years. Not since he became Duke Roger's squire. She sighed and put the thought away to go over later, when her head wasn't spinning. Until she had proof, she had to keep her suspicions to herself. Alright, sports fans. So that was chapter 3. I do have a surprise for you. I am, right after this, going to record chapter 4. Because I have been away for so very long. And to be quite honest, I kind of feel bad about it. There's not really a kind of about it. I definitely do. Because this is something I genuinely love to do. I have just let work and life and lack of sleep get in my way. So I'm going to try to not do that anymore. So be looking for the next chapter to come up fairly soon. I'm not going to read the name of the chapter because I'm literally going to read it right now to you guys. So just be looking for that. I'm going to upload this one once it's uploaded onto YouTube. Just be looking for chapter 4 to come out shortly after that. I am going to go eat dinner before I record it though, because I has the hungers. Anyway. Alright, book friends. I will see you guys in a little bit. Have a good one. Okay, love you. Bye.